I am chatting again with Manuel J. Galvan. I don't know why Manuel wants to talk to me. I don't know what's going on here, but this is like the fourth time we've chatted, and I do like talking with him. So this is going to be fun, and we've got two topics to talk about today. It's going to be tribalism and sex education. So Manuel and I are dealing with some technical issues here. There's a lag. Um, we're not quite sure where it's coming from, but there's a lag between us in our communication. So we're going to start the stream. We're going to see how it goes. If it doesn't go well, then we'll stop and reschedule. So we're going to go. So Manuel, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I think part of the delay is that I'm on the other side of the world right now. I'm in Turkey, in Istanbul, visiting my girlfriend's family. She's Turkish and she's also a grad student at UNC. So I think that's partly why this delay. Although I did try to test this on Zoom, so it's something about the software we're using. But yeah, happy to meet with you again. And like you keep getting in trouble on Twitter, and I keep being interested in hearing your thoughts about it. So.
Okay. Yeah, I guess you could say trouble. I mean, I like to ask interesting questions or make interesting comments and see what people say. So, and I like chatting with you because we share a kinship as social scientists, and or at least I like to call myself one, and you certainly are one. And so I like to hear what you have to say. Hmm? So the first question well, the first topic is tribal membership. So let me put this up. And again, we're working with a delay here. So I'll be speaking for a while and then I'll have to wait for Manuel to respond. But I put this up some weeks ago, or maybe it was last week. I don't know. And I said that there are very few free thinkers out there. And so I said, look, if you've got a collection of issues, I just threw 15 up, or I just said 15, a number, and you got a collection of issues, and you find that for all of those issues, or almost all of them, you share the same narrative with your tribe. It's just hard to see you as a free thinker. I think that you're checking in with your group to see whether or not this is the way you're supposed to think, and then you move forward with your thought process. So this is what I'm thinking now. Manuel disagrees. So Manuel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think like there's two ways we could talk about this. As with anything on Twitter, we can talk about like the specific content of the tweet, and we could also talk about the ideas that kind of underlie the tweet and where you're trying to go. I think like I can read first to the easiest thing to do, react to the tweet itself. And so I think there's like, and I commented about this on Twitter myself, is I just think there's like a presumption that the way to be free thinking is be between sides on particular issues. But it's like, to me, it's possible that the right answer to a particular issue isn't even in the current discourse. It could be that like the Republicans, neither one of them have the right answer to a question. It could be that the people who are talking on Twitter from the left and the people who are talking on Twitter from the right are just like neither one of them is really capturing for a given issue. So in that sense, I think like free thinking can't be banded by whatever the discourse is, because that discourse might be completely off base. So that was one thought I had when I read it. Another is that like it could also be the case that one side is generally more correct on a large set of issues, and that if you are a free thinking individual, that could still be the case, right? Like, so these are not like, it's not a mutually exclusive. It would be a weird world where like there's no ability of one side being like very wrong of issues on a bunch of different issues. I also think there's like mild dehumanization there at the end about tribal animals, which I wasn't like too fond. I think it's, it's Twitter. You're trying to be provocative, I guess.
Well, okay. I didn't know the mild dehumanization is something I was not expecting. The idea of a tribal animal is just, we're in tribes here, and I wasn't saying that people are less than human like that. I was just saying that that we are a part of social groups, and we often call them tribes. I mean, that's what I meant. But okay, all right. I think you're right about all of that in the abstract. I just think that these aren't math formulas we're talking about, and these aren't like scientific claims that are going into this. These are a collection of ideas and values and norms that are all kind of bundled together. So, for example, cancel culture. Okay, to me, if someone has a certain view about cancel culture, I can almost take that and understand what they think about 10 other different things. So if you think that there is cancel culture out there, then all of a sudden I can say, you probably think that there's something about CRT in schools, right? Or you probably think that, okay, free speech is well, I guess that kind of goes with cancel culture. But you see what I'm saying, though. One issue is almost enough for me to understand what another person is going to say in another issue, and that just makes me think it's somehow connected to tribes, not necessarily them just coming to some conclusion through reading and values, or not. Reading and their values and something like that.
No, I think that's true. There definitely are values in play. I wouldn't disregard like the weight of evidence either. I mean, I think on any given topic, the ones that you list here, like climate change, is there right next to CRT in schools, and so there are facts of the matter, right? That like
Mhm.
matter here, right? So climate change is just happening, and if you don't believe that it's happening, you're just on the wrong side of that issue. And we could talk about similar things in terms of trans rights or CRT. CRT is really a pushback against like the equity movements that exist in the United States. And so there has been a side historically against those types of civil rights movements, and that's been the conservative side of the United States. And they continue to be against those types of movements, whether it's with trans people, immigrants, Black people with CRT stuff. Like all of that is coherent in terms of values, right?
Okay, so let's use climate change a little bit, because
Sure.
of course I'm tweeting here, so I mean I'm kind of reducing things, and you're right. I try to write things in a way that will get people to look at it more than and respond. But the idea of climate change as being all about evidence, yes and no. So you're right, there is climate change. However, how we talk about that and understand it is the tribal part. So, okay, some people may say, if you're on the right, I guess, they may say, well, you know what? Yeah, there is some kind of climate change, but, and then they'll come up with all these sort of explanations or ways that we can work around it, or how it's overblown, or something like that, even if they admit the kernel of truth in it. Meanwhile, if you're on the left, your narrative, regardless of the evidence, is going to be different. Oh, there's climate change. We must do something right now to deal with this, because we're robbing future generations of a nice world to live in, right? So that's what I mean when I say it's about tribes. It's not the kernel of evidence underlying it. It's a certain narrative that surrounds that evidence. It's the same with CRT. I mean, it's just amazing. You have actual academics who know that the way that conversation started, that narrative about CRT started, they had to know that this body of legal thought is not being taught to eighth graders. However, they developed a narrative that fits on along with their social group, where it was like, okay, all right, it's not real CRT. It's like CRT light, and this represents, it's what we mean by CRT is, being critical, or racializing things, blah 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 blah. So they all of a sudden found a narrative that their group could kind of agree with, and so that's kind of what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. So I think obviously credit where credit is due. Like you have identified a problem in American politics. That's not to say that that's not a problem in American politics. I certainly agree with you that that is happening, and it happens on the left, it happens on the right, in terms of like people will just hear that Democrats are saying something and they'll defend that position, even if it's not a defensible position. And you'll see this happen on the political right. And so CRT is the latest Republican buzzword. So even if you are an educated person, like to vote for the Republicans because they're part of your tribe, then you'll find ways to defend that. I guess the issue that I take, the thing that I take issue with is that there are principled ways to have in these these particular topics. And so if you are reading just take the CRT stuff, if you're reading the investigative journalism that's found that like all of that came from the Discovery Institute and Chris Rufo, and it's designed to be this kind of misinformation campaign around what CRT is and where it came from, drawing in a bunch of facts that shape the way that you see that situation. And the same thing can be said about climate change. Just to react to what you said about how some people kind of have values that say we should do something about it or not do something about it. And I'm going to get into this a little, like my process here, but it's basically like read the experts on this topic, and they'll agree with what the left is saying on the topic of climate change. They'll say we need to act on it now. We need to be acting far faster than we are. And so on some degree that there is this like almost like partisan tribal nature to it. But at the same time, if you just talk to anybody who's like an expert in change, somebody who's an expert on vaccines, somebody who's an expert on like any of the things that enter into our political discourse, those people they might be tribal in some sense. They might say like the Republicans are wrong on this topic, the Democrats or the liberals are right on this topic or whatever. But those people I don't think are being tribal. I think that they have expertise and they know what they're talking about. And so I think it's important what they say, and that'll help you pinpoint. So in that sense, expertise might line up 10 times out of 10 with liberal talking points, but that doesn't mean that experts are, it just so happens that one of the two sides is more aligned with the evidence.
Okay, I buy that. I actually agree with that. I think that as far as the evidence goes, yes, generally speaking, for most topics, the left tends to have more scientific evidence backing whatever policies they have. And I mean, it's sort of baked into the system. Conservatives for a long time have just rejected academia. They say that it's it's progressive or leftist or liberal, and so if you start from that view, then when an expert comes to you and says, look, this is what I've learned, they'll say, oh, no, you're just a progressive social justice person, so I'm going to dismiss what you have to say. So yeah, no, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, I mean, that's my primary approach, right? Because if your approach is I can't agree with the left on all the issues because then I'm a tribal animal, then you're going to be wrong on a few topics because you're trying your hardest to be like heterodox.
Mm-hmm.
Topics will just make you wrong.
Okay, fair enough. As long as it's about just the science, then I think you're absolutely right. I think I'm trying to add a layer of, because a lot of this is not so cut and dried, and it's also about like culture or morals or what you want to see done in society. And so in that case, I mean, you're still right. You can't just decide to be heterodox just to be that. I mean, you have to have reasons. Um, but yeah, if it's just about science, then sure. You can't just say the opposite thing just to say it, to be heterodox. It really needs to be grounded in evidence. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's similar arguments that one could make from, I would at least, from a consequentialist standpoint about rights and moral issues too. Like, like, I don't know, we do it with race questions all the time and with class, right? Like, should we redistribute wealth? Now, I would say, like, well, sure, there's a pretty strong correlation between inequality and negative health outcomes, right? So if we want to alleviate health outcomes, we should deal with inequality. And somebody will say, well, but that's a fairness issue. You're getting into ethics, you're getting into morality. And it's like, well, yes, but I also have an evidence-based reason to think that this system, that if you're going to have two systems, one where you have massive inequality the way we do it now, which is like what you find in a lot of Western European countries, they just have better outcomes. And like we could have better outcomes. States, U.S. states that have less equality, U.S. states that have more states, stuff like that. Like, it's always a mixture, right? It's like, I think people living is good. So there's like values there, right? But it's also based in like scientific evidence that shows that we have evidence that it is indeed better if there's less equality, if there's less inequality.
Okay, so all right, thanks for that. Let's move to our second topic here. We only have two today, so that means we won't. I think the last time we've gone for like an hour, but we probably won't go for an hour this time. Also, it seems as if the lag shortened just now. So maybe Restream is getting their act together here. It was a little bit better for a second. Now I want to ask this next question here. If I can get it up. Yeah. What are your thoughts on sex education? So I guess since this is sort of piggybacking off of something that I've been talking about, I guess I should start with mine, and then you can tell me yours. So um, uh, I want good sex education in schools. However, I don't believe this is all evidence based. I don't think it's just okay. Let's just teach the facts about sex education. I think that this is a cultural thing. I think that I mean, if you take a intro to sociology course, you'll read some section about the sociology of education, and they'll talk about the formal curriculum and the hidden curriculum, and I think that whether we know it or not, which direction we want to go with sex education will be along two tracks informally. Either we will, in a way, support um, well, I hate to say it like this, but sort of condone sex between young people and just teach them how to do it better. People hate when I say it that way, but that's what I mean. Or we could say, look, we think that it might not be a good idea to have sex at a young age, and let's figure out other ways to develop relationships and start families without having sex. Those are not evidence-based things. Those are just cultural values. And so I try to bring this up when I talk about this online. So for me, right, I would actually prefer a sex education that focuses on other ways of building relationships and not necessarily say, okay, since you're having sex, here are the ways that you can do it better or something like that. So that's the sexuality part, and then the gender part. I think that's okay. I think I'm on board with the whole. I mean, who wouldn't be? We don't want to erase people who are not cisgender. We want to talk about these types of things. We want to teach young people about having two dads or two moms or being transgender. I think that's important too. So those are my views about sex education.
Yeah. So I think this is a really great test case of like the values versus evidence thing that we were talking about right before this. Because I think you are right. There's values here, but I guess I'll push back a little bit that I think that there is also evidence that's relevant to deciding what we want to do here, right? So like, so yes, there could be two different types of cultures. One where we kind of emphasize abstinence, and we try to get kids to see their relationships as primarily like they're not trying to go have sex with their girlfriend necessarily, and we don't really instill those values. And then another one where we're like, hey, like you're probably gonna have sex, people have sex, kids like at teenagers start having sex, so here's like a safe way to do it. And that, well, where I think the evidence comes up is those will produce different outcomes in the world, right? So is it true that if you instill abstinence values that you get less sex? Do you get less pregnancies? Do you get less STDs? And if you don't, then that is evidence that that abstinence version of sex education is not effective. Like it's not the outcomes that I would assume you would want, which is like kids not having sex, kids not having out of wedlock marriages. I'm sorry, out of wedlock and not getting at sexually transmitted diseases. Like if by creating those, if trying to inculcate those values creates a bunch of negative outcomes as a consequence, then the fact that you want those values is kind of not, there's a trying to instill. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think that if the purpose of sex education was to address those outcomes solely, then sure, you have to go with the education that would address those outcomes. I'm just not entirely sure that that's what a lot of parents are concerned about. In other words, yes, they would certainly like it if their son or daughter don't become parents or get STDs at a very young age or ever actually the STDs, right? So I mean, yes, they would certainly want that, but I'm imagining that those parents are saying, look, my values are such. I think that sex is something that is precious and something that should happen later in life. I want my son or daughter to value the family unit and having sex within that. I mean, those are cultural values, regardless of the hard outcomes, right? And so unlike math or English or science, where you can talk about those things outside of a person's values, for the most part, you really can't do it with this. And so, I mean, in some ways, you're being the stereotypical scientist in a way. You're just okay. Well, here I'm doing the bean counting here, and you see, if you do this education thing here, then this is what you get. Meanwhile, the audience is like, well, that's not what I'm really caring about here. I'm caring about these other things, and I think some people miss the point. I would say one last thing before I stop here. One of the things I'm upset about is when people try and articulate what I just said, saying that they want their kids to reflect the values that they have, somehow it gets translated into, I don't know, being regressive or being prudish, or in some ways almost being like anti um, trans or anti or sex negative. I don't know, so some sort of negative way. And I don't think so. I think that a lot of parents are just simply trying to instill what they think is a good life in a proper way of living to their kids.
Yeah, I have a few reactions. One is that people might feel like I just want to instill my values, but this is the argument that's been used basically to hold back progress on any front, right? Let's say, like, at some point, women started to be able to enter into educational spaces and make an educational background, and a parent could come in and be like, I know you think that that's going to be good for women or whatever, but cultural and value back, I don't think that's something that I really need. I actually think my daughter will be much happier in a marriage where she can have a couple kids and kind of have that situation. This on me, but I know you say that there's evidence that this is better off, that women are better off, but I don't really, I don't care about that evidence. I have me, and I think if you just look through American history, it's full of people who are just making a values argument. They're don't care about the evidence, and I think we should. I think like values is fine. Put your kid into a private school if that's what you like. If that's what you really want, you want to have like your values drive their education, then there are. But I think public institutions have to make decisions based on the best possible pedagogy that's going to lead your child to having the best outcome. Because you're going to deprive children like of school just because their parents don't want it. Now we're in an issue, a contradiction between the rights of the child and the rights of the parent. Right, the parent saying, "I want you to allow that kid is going to grow up with a higher chance of getting an STD, a higher chance of impregnating their girlfriend sex is because you told them that." So we just have this tension now between the rights of the child and the rights of the parent. And I feel like we should err on the side of the child in a public institution.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that when you say that abstinence-only education leads to poorer outcomes than the particular education that is being the trend now in schools. I mean, I've read that abstinence only doesn't work, but I think that was in the context of some sort of simplistic, okay, just wait until you're an adult, don't have sex types of, a very simplistic, 1 hour kind of thing in middle school or something. I think that what can happen is if society has values that they want kids to reach, there's no reason why you can't incorporate, like a family-oriented approach that pushes other ways to develop friendships. That doesn't just have to be just about abstinence and don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. You can come up with something more comprehensive that may actually mean that, okay, if they happen to have sex, it's rarer or it's less often or something, or they seriously consider the implications of having sex with someone at that age. I mean, all of that can happen. It doesn't have to be the simplistic abstinence versus sex positive types of approaches. It's just a matter of whether or not we want that. So that's one thing. And I've heard this rights of the parent, rights of the child framing. I think we kind of DM'd about this, and I kind of get that, but I just wonder if, in some ways, what people are doing is saying, I want my values instilled in not that child and not the parents' values. And so they then call it, and so they then call it children's rights. But it's really, I want this culture instilled in that child. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's sort of, I'm still playing with that idea, but something tells me that is. I'm not saying you're doing that, Manuel. I'm still playing with that idea in my head. But yeah, yeah.
I think as long as there's an evidentiary basis to make such decisions, then I don't think we're really talking about values. And so, like, I can share with you, and you could put it in the show notes of this video if you want. But there was in 2021 there was a comprehensive review there was a review of decades of. It just is the case that comprehensive sex education of the type that isn't just about traditional values around sex, but the complexities of other identities, as well as like how to reduce intimate partner violence and how to discuss sex with your romantic group. It's just all the positive benefits that come from these interventions, and they prevent sexual abuse. Which is crazy because the people who are against this kind of stuff are the very people who are calling everybody a groomer. These the actual ways to solve these problems are very often from using comprehensive sex education in the classroom. Values embedded in that, right? Like, I don't want to live in a world where there's as much date rape as there is and partner violence, and I want kids to do that. moving forward. Yeah, there's definitely values embedded in that, but like, I don't know, same types of values that instill in me the desire to want to solve any other social problem that we have. Like, we kind of have to use the tools that we have, and K through 12 sex education works to help solve those problems. Now, I will say just something we might agree on. I did an episode with my co-host, a bit more complicated, our podcast. We had a sex education expert on, and she's very insistent, like K through 12 sex education, and it's so effective. We need it. Sees things like in a very clear perspective. Dylan, my co-host, is more on the side of like, abstinence education is a complete aberration. Like, it should never be taught to a kid. It's harmful. It's like, we shouldn't do it. I'm a little bit more just like, I know what, like if, and honestly, like, what's the most foolproof way to prevent a pregnancy? Abstinence. Like, don't have sex, and you there's no STDs, there's no pregnancy. Like, that's the only foolproof way to do it. And I think like starting a sex education class with that as like an obvious true fact makes perfect sense. And so I'm not against like including a conversation about like not delaying, not having a teenager as like possible ways to move through your life, and like leaving that open for the people who wanted. I'm just like, I don't think that should be the only thing that you teach in the classroom. And I think if you're going to, use the values argument to say this is the only way to do it, then that's where you're departing from the evidence, you're preventing the rights of the children. That's where I think it comes into play.
Okay. Now, I agree with that. Now, I'm going to show you something. The delay is going to make this a little problematic, but I want to put it here for posterity. I want to put this up, and maybe in the weeks and months ahead, if someone sees this, it could be informative. So I decided to look at the standards, and I wanted to, we're not doing that slide. And I wanted to do two things, or I wanted to look at two different standards, and I want to make the argument about ideology here. So you hear, and I actually don't like that word. I think it's overused, but this is what's used in the discourse. This idea that, okay, you got these leftist educators trying to impose an ideology on our kids, and I don't like it. And people are campaigning on this. Get ideology out of schools. So this is the National Education Standards. And if you read these things, okay, you may say, okay, interesting. If you look at the actually, I don't know what they mean by advancements in medical technologies. Maybe that's some kind of new IUD. I mean, what does it even mean? Advancements in medical technologies. But anyway, so they're giving all of these bullet points here. Which some of them are awesome, but look at the third one: increased focus on bodily autonomy, consent, and sexual agency. Maybe some parent, some 50-year-old parent will say, sexual agency. What are they trying to teach my kid? I mean, that's I kind of get what they're saying here. I mean, I think it's good, but the parent is gonna be like, what does this even mean? Okay, and you keep going down. I'm good with the bullet point, the continual evolution in language related to gender. I like that, but I think a lot of parents will say, well, why you got to talk about sexual orientation and sexual identity? This is do you need this? And then this last one, okay, inclusion of power and privilege, conscious and unconscious bias, intersectionality. Okay, all right, so that's the whole litany of progressive ideas there, all in one bullet point. Now, most of this I'm fine with, so I don't have a problem with it. But I'm putting this up because I can imagine someone looking at this and thinking, yeah, this is just a bunch of leftist ideology being taught to my kids. And then if they go, which I don't agree with, I'm just putting it up. And then if you go to Virginia standards, they have a health education or family life education thing. And this is even optional. But it's just so different. Like, so you start with the second sentence. These standards include age-appropriate instruction in family living and community relationships. Then they got the abstinence part, which, we've kind of established is problematic. The value of postponing sexual activity, the benefits of adoption as a positive choice in the event of an unwanted pregnancy, human sexuality, and human reproduction. Now, some parent in San Francisco may look at this and say, "What are they trying to teach my kids here? What are you talking about? Benefits of adoption, and why are they teaching abstinence? Kids are having sex anyway." This is imposing some kind of ideology on my kids. So you see the stark contrast here. It's just amazing here. I don't have a question for you, Manuel. I just kind of want your thoughts on what's happening.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think somebody reading, it's funny because I can code switch too. I'm from Texas, so like I have just my background is having a lot of conversations with more conservative people, and so when I'm reading that, these are scary words that you're reading on your page of things that are going to be taught to your kids. And similarly, while I'm looking at this Virginia Department of Education one, this doesn't seem great. Says I see what you mean. In terms of the first one, I just want to point out that like the stuff that's in those standards, and standards about power and privilege, bias, intersectionality, blah blah, like those are commonly used topics within the we established this in the beginning. Just don't like science in many cases. There's a lot of people who, not just the science around like discrimination and power and privilege, but science around climate change, like a bunch of evolutionary biology. Like we could talk about a bunch of different stuff, and they'll just don't like it. So they are scary words, also true. There are true things. Scientists have evaluated, study, they exist in the real world. And in that sense, it makes sense to put it in a curriculum. A parent might see something about in their biology textbook and be like, "Oh, that scared me," but it's like, yeah, but that's just how the world works. It's facts. This is just reality. Imposing in on your conception of it that doesn't match the way it actually is kind of my reaction to this first set. For the second set, and I think the bigger point here is just like, whichever one leads to a better outcome is the one that I want. Like, if this Virginia led to, if we saw a very clear signal that a conservative, this approach, I don't care about it not reflecting my values. Like, go with it. It's actually working. For some reason, it's working. But from what I understand, research literature, that's just not the case. It doesn't match a curriculum that helps people. And so I just feel like that's the ultimate, the ultimate, at least that's the way as a kind of evidence-based voter.
Okay. You know what? I'm going to listen to the podcast you did with the sex education academic or expert, and hear that discussion, because I wonder about the research. There's no doubt. Ever since I was in my 20s, I've been hearing that abstinence-only education doesn't work, and so I have no reason to doubt that. One question that I have, though, is what types of outcomes are they looking at? In other words, I wonder if certain types of sex education leads to, this is just speculating, like divorce or getting married at a young age or choosing the wrong partner or something like that. I don't know if that research has been done. There may be no link, but I would like to check it out. Now, let me end with this here, just to ask you a question, which you've kind of already answered, really. So, but I'll ask it anyway. Can social science inform these discussions?
Yeah, this is whenever we have to make a decision about how to spend its money, how the government's going to make it any decision, anything. I think you way in the year of our Lord 2022 get together experts on these topics to help you make these decisions. Like politicians and the rest of us, we're all just too busy what we do in our lives to know like how we should structure our education programs and what are the things we should focus on. And so we have to rely on people who know more about these topics than we do. Politicians don't design planes because they will fall out of the sky if they did. And it's the same thing with basically anything else, any other venture that humanity wants to set its mind to. We have brilliant people doing work out there who study this, who dedicate their lives to understanding any particular topic, guiding our decisions on whatever it is. Now, it's not to say I'm not really advocating for a democracy where the democracy just doesn't interface with this decision-making process. At the end of the day, like, experts can lose sight of certain things, and so you do need to have just like average everyday people in there to help make these decisions. But I think like you kind of have to have all of that. You have to have experts in the room to some extent. And so the other thing I'll say here is like you advocates for these evidence-based policies, whatever front we're fighting for them on. I mean, if it's sex education, if it's climate change, if it's health policy, like we have to be the ones who say, hey, let's have a more reasonable evidence-based society, and let's keep pushing forward on those fronts, because there's a lot of people out there who are fighting for their side that isn't evidence-based. And so it's scary to me that not more scientists don't speak up.
Yeah, I agree with that. We need to have more science communicators and more people who are advocating for evidence-based approaches. I'm going to add my own personal wrinkle on this. I think that first we have to decide where we want to go. You used the plane analogy, and first we have to decide if we want to build the planes. Then we bring in the experts to help us build it. And so it's the same here. We started with the tribal membership thing, and I think that there's a problem with tribalism in the United States, and I don't like it. That's a personal thing. I think it maybe there's evidence to say that it causes democracy to disintegrate. I don't know, but personally, I think it's a bad thing. And if enough people think it's a bad thing, then we may say, okay, let's bring in some political scientists and some communication experts, and let's figure out how to solve this problem. And I think it's the same with sex education. First, it starts with something we want done, something we think that's important. Lowering the rates of STDs and teen pregnancies, these types of things. And then we bring in the experts to say, all right, what's the best educational program to get that done? And so that's kind of how I think about it. And but yeah, you're right. We need more people speaking up about the importance of science and research and solving our problems. Okay, Manuel, this has been fun, man. We kind of worked through the lag
on that front of topics. I think like 90% of Americans support sex education. There's not polarity here. Like almost everybody agrees we need sex education, and not just like abstinence only, but just like comprehensive sex education. There's some interesting polling on that we get into in our episode. So there's hope, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, let's end it here. And I was saying that we kind of worked through the lag. We did a pretty good job of giving the other person time to react. So that was pretty cool. And maybe the next time we have this conversation, you'll say something controversial, and I can ask you, Manuel, what the hell were you thinking? Right? Maybe we can try that for a change.
I don't know. I don't like to. I'm not. I don't. Yeah, I'm not trying to piss anybody off. I'm just trying to be as reasonable about the issues that I care about as I can be. So hopefully some people find that appealing.
They will. Okay. Take care, brother.
Thanks.